The central theme of what I'm going to say is that we are not simply spectators. We are not passive observers of events that are taking place at an elite level, and the job of socialists and revolutionaries is to intervene, to shape the outcome of the crisis which has been revealed by the European Union referendum result. The meeting is not centrally about the discussions around the European Union, but let me just in a very brief form say what our analysis of that result was. The Socialist Workers Party took the position of arguing for a leave vote from a left perspective, centrally because of two themes. One, that the European Union was an undemocratic enforcer of austerity across a continent, evidenced most clearly by the financial waterboarding and destruction of the Tsipras government in Greece when it tried to stand up against austerity. And secondly, because of Fortress Europe, the laws and policies which keep people out of the European Union and have led to the deaths of thousands of people in the Mediterranean and have now been made even worse by the deal with Turkey to return refugees from Greece to one of the most undemocratic and brutal regimes in the world. Furthermore, we were against the TTIP deals and the general corporate control of the European Union. That's why we voted for leave, and therefore we were glad the vote was for leave. What did that vote reveal? Fundamentally, I would argue, the vote was the central feature of that result was a revolt against the establishment, that people who are generally forgotten, ignored, or sneered at delivered a stunning blow against the people at the top of society. We agree with Diane Abbott, who described it as a roar of defiance against the Westminster elite. We agree with Jeremy Corbyn, who, despite arguing for a Remain vote, said that one clear message from last Thursday's vote is that millions of people feel shut out of a political and economic system that has let them down. And if you look at the analyses after the referendum, it's very clear. Look, for example, at what the difference between Remain and Leave voters is around a couple of questions. A small majority, and it is a small majority, by the way, of those who voted to Remain think that for most children growing up today, life will be better than it was for their parents. Leavers think the opposite by 61% to 39%. Leavers see more threats than opportunities to their standard of living from the way that the economy and society are changing. By 71% to 29%, they things are getting worse. That is not a fantasy for millions of people in Britain today. The reality is their lives are getting worse, and the lives of their children will be worse than their own. And therefore, the result centrally is a cry of rage against the people at the top of society, most marked in those areas which have suffered not just 8 years of economic crisis in the present spasm of capitalism, but 30 years of what Thatcher did and from which they have never recovered. Look at the vote in places like Doncaster. Look at the vote in places like the South Wales valleys, and you will see people who have been spat upon from a great height for decades saw this as an opportunity to hit back. That's not the whole of the vote. Nobody can ignore that also part of the vote has been marked by racism and distaste at the fact that immigrants have been allowed into Britain. This is a reality. It can't be ignored. The fact that there have been racist attacks on individuals and property since the referendum cannot be ignored, but it's not the whole of the vote. It is not true that 17 million people across Britain are racists. Our task is to address the message that came out of that referendum, because it is clear that we need to unite after the referendum and to say, however you voted, we need a stronger current against austerity and against racism. And one comrade put it very well at a meeting I just went to when he said, I ask people not how they voted, but what they voted for. It's not a bad way of putting it, in truth, because we recognise that many Remain voters did so for anti-racist reasons, because they were so sickened by the official Leave campaign by Farage and Johnson, and that many did it because they believed that this was the best way to protect workers' rights. We don't agree with that, but nonetheless we recognise that, and we therefore seek to unite with those people against racism. And one of the central messages of Marxism is that however you voted, it is now crucial for all of us to unite against racism in our communities, to demonstrate on the 16th of July against austerity and racism, and to make sure that there is no place for racism to grow, to defend the freedom of movement, to defend migrants and asylum seekers, and to make sure that we come out of this with a stronger anti-racist and anti-austerity movement, not one that is weaker because of the divisions of the referendum. I'll say as well that what has been revealed is it wasn't just an episodic campaign that showed the nature of racism in Britain. Racism in Britain has been whipped up by people at the top of society, whether they were on the Leave or the Remain side, not for a few weeks, but for years and for decades. And we need to call that out. It was Cameron who spoke about swarms of migrants, who called them a bunch of migrants. It was other people inside the Remain camp as well as the Leave camp who unleashed the most brutal scapegoating in order to deflect from their own crimes at the top of society. It was David Cameron who unleashed that foul campaign against Sadiq Khan, an Islamophobic campaign, in order to try and win the London mayoralty. And it's a much deeper question than simply the question of what happened around the referendum campaign. Now, one of the things we also have to recognise is that the referendum result has plunged the British ruling class into a deep crisis. Cameron has gone. We should celebrate that fact. Cameron has gone. Now, it is true he is likely to be replaced by another Tory. That's likely in a Tory leadership election, unless, I don't know, Liz Kendall or someone decided to stand for it. But, you know, it is likely to happen. But look at the crisis they're in. Oh, Johnson is now going to be Prime Minister. He's not. Johnson is not going to be Prime Minister. And I noticed there's a beautiful article in the Financial Times, which I could just read out today, about the crisis they're in. But it quotes Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who's the German foreign minister, who they describe as exasperated, who says, the Tories have turned what was an inner-party conflict into a full-blown state and government crisis. You cannot discern that anybody on the British Isles now has a plan of what to do. And then they talk to another senior British officials in Brussels who say, people have compared this to the Suez crisis. You know, that's the 1956 crisis in Egypt and so on. If only, he says, this is far, far worse than that. Cameron gave an interview a year ago in which he said the three things he would be remembered for were keeping Britain in the EU, halting Scottish independence, and repairing Britain's public finances. All three now. All three. Well done, Cameron. So Britain's is voted to leave the EU. The question of Scottish independence is now even more firmly, perhaps, on the agenda, with another referendum possible and a much greater likelihood of it being passed. And yesterday, of course, George Osborne retreated from what had been one of his central pledges, which was to achieve a surplus in the British finances by 2020, which would have meant immense austerity. Yesterday, just at the time as Gove was announcing his leadership campaign, he made a statement that he was giving up on this aim. And it's a big thing, actually. It's a very big thing that they have once more had to back off from one of the central economic pledges that they have made. And do not believe that they are easily going to be able to come together again. I know Theresa May is now the candidate that's seen most likely to win, a brutal role as Home Secretary, and a very nasty set of politics. One of the interesting things is all the political commentators say, oh, she has a great, tremendous asset. She was a lukewarm Remainer, a tremendous asset. Of course, this is why Jeremy Corbyn is absolutely impossible because he was a lukewarm Remainer. He must be removed. The political commentariats have a great unanimity around this question. And even if there are apparently moves to try and keep Gove off the ballot paper now, that May is telling some of her supporters to support another candidate so that she gets more than them and keep Gove. It's a nasty world in the Conservative Party, let me tell you. But although that crisis exists, and it's very important because it will echo down the years in front of us, that's not enough just to watch and say that we can inevitably gain from it, because we do know that there are crises which can be seized by the left and crises that can be seized by the right. And the right will seek to benefit from this crisis as well. I've already said the disgusting racist attacks that have happened, the attempts by fascists to organise. We know that during the campaign, Joe Cox was murdered by a Nazi, which was at least in part because of the way in which that campaign, the sorts of speeches that Farage made, but actually rested upon a much larger and more long-term racism inside British society ripped up from the top. And therefore, we have to say, what are we going to do about this to impose a working class solution to the crisis? How is this going to be resolved in the interests of the vast majority rather than the tiny elite at the top of society who have just been rejected in that poll? And one of the ways that could be resolved is by a much higher level of class struggle. It is regrettably true, however, that the level of class struggle in Britain, by I mean strikes and protests and demonstrations and occupations and so on, remains very low, particularly the question of strikes. It's brilliant, very, very important that next Tuesday in England there's a national teachers' strike. Fantastic place of unity. Unity. You know, lots of teachers, I'm sure, voted for Remain. This is a place where everybody, however you voted, we're all united against the people at the top of society. I know there's a row inside some sections of the NUT. This is a bad time to strike because it's a national emergency and so on. It's a bloody great time to strike. It's a great time. They couldn't be weaker, your opponents. That strike's really, really important. The strike of the junior doctors, the repeated strike, 8 strikes, wasn't it, of junior doctors, were incredibly important. All the strikes that are taking place across the universities, one nearly every day takes place in a different university somewhere, very, very important. And all the smaller strikes, we heard, didn't we, at the opening rally from the National Museums Wales strikers, brilliant, and the National Gallery and the Pennine Foods, and I could go on about them. But the truth is, the general level of struggle is very, very low. And the reason for that is not because in general, people feel satisfied and happy about things. It is because the trade union leaders have failed to provide the focuses to fight back and to defeat people. And I could go through, I haven't got time to do it. Mark Thomas is doing a meeting on the state of the industrial struggle later on in this event. But chance after chance has been missed to do that. And what a contrast there is between the absolute weakness of the TUC and the trade union struggles against the anti-union laws in Britain and what has happened in France. In France, you see the potential that once a focus is given for people to fight back, an immense struggle is possible in society, which can begin to change the whole political atmosphere. And therefore, one of the things we have to do is to support all the strikes that are taking place, but to try and get more of them as well, and to coordinate them, and to raise the level of class struggle in Britain. And therefore, the work that Unite the Resistance is doing in creating the networks around people, the work we're doing in our own workplaces, and the activity to pull together solidarity around those who are fighting back is incredibly important around that. But I also think this is a time when politics is absolutely central. Politics is always to the fore in revolutionaries' minds, but here it is an absolutely crucial thing. And here Jeremy Corbyn's struggle is, above all else, should be in the forefront of our minds. It's absolutely clear that a large section of the Parliamentary Labour Party, the MPs, never reconciled them to the fact that Corbyn had won the election. He'd won by 59.5%, a bigger percentage than any leader has done for decades in British political history. He had absolutely smashed the gruesome three candidates he was up against and had demonstrated a radical mood amongst a substantial section of people, particularly young people, in Britain. You know, the Labour right came up with this brilliant scheme. We will change the way the leader is elected. We'll sideline those nasty trade union leaders because they're too left-wing, and we'll open it up to the public. And they're all really very right-wing, the public. So they'll vote for the most right-wing candidate. What a brilliant scheme it was. And of course, what they found out was that hundreds of thousands of people actually were far to the left. Not only of Tony Blair, but of Ed Miliband. And in their tens of thousands went to Jeremy Corbyn's rallies, paid their £3 to get a vote, and voted him in by overwhelming numbers. It was a cause of great celebration. It was less than a year ago now, wasn't it? That great day in September when Corbyn was elected and tens of thousands of people marched across Britain in support of refugees. It was a great day, very, very important to remember it. But they never reconciled themselves to it, these people, and they decided that they were going to get rid of him. The first opportunity was going to be electoral, that he would be a failure in the elections, they would lose all the by-elections. Regrettably for them, they won all the by-elections, sometimes by larger majorities. And then there would be the council elections, where they would absolutely show he was completely incapable of winning, and they'd lose all the mayor elections. They won all the mayor elections with bigger majorities, and although one shouldn't get carried away, in truth, by the council election results, they were good enough to show that Corbyn was certainly not someone who could be sidelined around this. And therefore they decided we will get rid of him after the EU referendum, where we will declare that he has been useless. And if you didn't think it was coordinated and strategised, read the Daily Telegraph, where Ben Riley-Smith, Telegraph political correspondent, wrote on the 13th of June, that's 10 days before the referendum, Labour rebels are preparing to topple Corbyn after the referendum in a 24-hour media blitz. By fanning the flames with front-bench resignations and public criticism, they think the signatures needed to trigger a leadership race can be gathered within a day. And that's exactly what happened. Exactly what happened. Hilary Benn, that man who played a disgusting role during the Syria debate, should have been sacked then, by the way, for speaking in support of the Syrian bombing, started off a process whereby they all, in a serial fashion, resign. And not just the Blairites, by the way. Quite important. I know people often say the Blairites are turning against Corbyn. It's not just Blairites. Gordon Brown is many things. He is not a Blairite. Remember the history. Remember the history. People like Andy Slaughter and Lisa Nandy are on the soft left, actually the harder left bit of the soft left, in truth. It's much broader than that. They decided that they were going to get him. And one of the interesting things is they clearly thought Corbyn would resign and they'd get rid of him. And he hasn't. And it's great that he hasn't resigned. It's great. Because now they have a bit of a problem. Because now they have to come forward with a candidate, and then they have to submit themselves to this horrible process known as an election. 60,000 people have joined the Labour Party in the last week. Think of that, 60,000. It doesn't often happen to us, I have to say. 60,000 in a week. My guess is a guess, all right? It's a guess. 45,000 of those have joined in order to support Jeremy Corbyn. It might be more. But my guess is that's about 45. So if they had problems before with what the electorate looked like, Their problems now are far, far greater. So now, suddenly, they're not quite sure whether they're running a candidate, who the candidate might be. So it was Angela Eagle, who was described everywhere as an Angela Merkel-like figure, which personally I've never seen as a huge accolade for a Labour politician, but still. And then Owen Smith. Now, be honest, who had ever heard of Owen Smith before we started all this, right? Well, there's one. Well done. Do you come from Pontypridd? But, you know, Owen Smith, who gave an interview a few months ago in which he said, Jeremy is going to lead us into the 2020 election. He's the leader. He said very, very clear that he wants to take us into the next election. He won a stonking great majority. Jeremy is going to be taking us into the election in 2020, end of. Which is an important quote to recall about Owen Smith. But, you know, the only other thing notable about him is when Jeremy Corbyn said we're going to get rid of the benefits cap, he immediately stood up and said, no, we're not going to get rid of the benefits cap. You know, we're going to keep benefits low for ordinary people. So the hashtag that now goes round is chicken coup, because, you know, they're not so sure now about this. They're not so sure about coming forward. Will it be Angela Eagle? Will it be Owen Smith? Will it be someone else in front? And the truth is, if there is an election, I think a year ago I wasn't really sure whether Corbyn was going to live, but I'll say it now, Corbyn's probably going to win the election inside it. And this is incredibly subversive. Incredibly subversive. Think about it. The whole history of the Labour Party has been the preeminence of the MPs. A party based upon the idea that you get change through Parliament, therefore privileges the MPs at the top of that party. Suddenly, there is a war to the death going on now between 81% of the MPs and the membership is supporting the leader of the party against the MPs. This opens up a completely different strategy and possibilities to that which existed before. Because it means that Corbyn has to look outside the MPs in order to make sure that he stays in office. And I hope he does stay. The worst possible bloody thing would be if he now decided to step down. I know it's Tom Watson in the papers today. He's going to hold another meeting with him to explain why he ought to step down. Tom Watson, piss off. We're not interested in hearing that. And, I mean, one of the other things that they're floating is the idea of a national government. It's honestly being floated now. There are some people who are saying the good people in the Tories and these good Labour people, the ones who are against Corbyn in other words, it's a time of great crisis, we need a national government. You know, John McTernan, who's the voice of the Labour right, if you like, very successful man, he was Jim Murphy's spin doctor, did fantastically well in Scotland. You can see his advice is to be followed in all respects. He's in favour of it. The Financial Times as well is saying that, you know, there's talk about this, that we ought to have a national government. These are big things that are happening in British politics. And the position put forward, think how subversive it is. If Corbyn is removed by one means or another, I think 100,000 people will leave the Labour Party, maybe more. It's a guess, right? But I think 100,000, particularly the newer people, the younger people inside it. If Corbyn wins, what are those 81% of MPs going to do? Oh, sorry, Jeremy, it was all a mistake. And is he going to say that to them? Is he going to say that to them, by the way? Oh, don't worry about it, I didn't mind. You were trying to slit my throat. But, you know, these things happen in politics, don't they? Now, but seriously, think about this. In a few weeks, this is going to be resolved one way or another. I think it is highly possible that there will be a split in the Labour Party. Maybe something like the SDP of the early 1980s, which was terrible, by the way. It delivered an election for Thatcher, but, you know, that's one possibility where the right goes off. Or if Corbyn is removed, there'll be a split to the left, which would be a very exciting possibility in British politics and will create something like Syriza in Britain. Now, these are big developments to which we have to align ourselves. And the first thing to say is we have to support Corbyn against the right, but we have to very much stress that the critical question of whether Corbyn survives or not will not be decided inside the Labour Party. It will be decided in the streets and the workplaces and the trade unions about people who organise to support Corbyn and take action on the streets. Every strike will strengthen Corbyn. Every protest will strengthen Corbyn. Every occupation will strengthen Corbyn. It was brilliant that thousands of people came out and demonstrated in Parliament Square last week, because people weren't just sitting on Facebook making comments about it. Thousands of people were there. And that was a tremendous celebration of the fact that there was going to be a struggle over this question. I mean, I'll return later to what we think about this, but it's quite clear that everyone has to get behind Corbyn. And it means, for example, that anyone thinking of standing in an election against the Labour Party should not do this without the most careful consideration, because it is not a central element of struggle at the moment to be running candidates against Labour candidates in by-elections or council elections or whatever. There was one in Haringey that's called this week, and quite rightly, in my view, ourselves and the Socialist Party and the RMT, the people who were in task, decided, the Trade Union and Socialist Coalition, decided that it was completely the wrong time to run a candidate and are not running a candidate in Haringey. It's the right thing to have done, and it's a general rule that we should apply at this time. But there will be this fallout, and we have to think about what we are going to say in the future around this. And we will be much, much stronger if in this period we are the people who are supporting Corbyn and, for example, demanding that the trade union leaders, who so far, almost to a woman and a man, have been very good in saying they support Corbyn, must not back off. I mean, I don't know if you know the history of the 1930s. There's a man called George Lansbury who was the most left-wing Labour leader until the present. In fact, he was probably to the left of Corbyn in some senses. Lansbury made a famous speech when he was Labour leader, for example, calling for the entire abolition of the Army and the Royal Navy, and of turning battleships into educational cruises for children. And actually survived as Labour leader, which is quite interesting. He was removed in the end, not actually by a revolt of the MPs, but by a brutal speech at the Labour Party conference from Ernest Bevin, who was the leader of the TGW, the Transport Workers Union, the giant union in Britain at the time. Once the trade union leaders turned on Lansbury, he was finished. He was finished. And actually, the only thing that could remove Jeremy Corbyn now, in my view, is a tap on the shoulder from Len McCluskey. It wouldn't even have to be done publicly. If Len McCluskey and maybe Dave Prentice or Tim Roach of the GMB went to him and said, Jeremy, you're a wonderful man, but for the good of the party and the country and all that stuff, I think Corbyn would be finished. So we have to put pressure on our trade union leaders to say, keep supporting Corbyn, don't fall back from it, and in addition, our trade union must not give a penny to an MP or a councillor who has stabbed Jeremy Corbyn in the back. I was very, very glad one of our comrades, Helen Davis, raised this in the meeting last night with Dave Ward and Ian Hodson, and Dave Ward from the CW said she was absolutely right to say the union should not give a penny or any support to the people who have turned against Corbyn, and that's something we should run across the trade union movement. It's a very good thing to take forward. So what are the focuses that we need to concentrate on? There are three absolutely central things we have to do, as well as the teachers' strike next Tuesday, which is of the greatest importance, and everyone should be on the picket lines, everyone should get to the rallies, everyone should try and take their trade union banners, even if they're not teachers, to the rallies that are taking place. It will be the biggest show of anti-austerity feeling if we make those rallies into really powerful things. But the demonstration on the 16th of July is absolutely central. The demonstration called by Stand Up to Racism and the People's Assembly, a demonstration not just about racism, but against austerity as well. Why against the two? Because we have to speak to those millions of people across Britain who have contradictory consciousnesses. They hate the elite at the top of society. They voted against the EU partly because it was undemocratic and corporate controlled and felt precisely the sort of institution which is designed to keep people like them down. But there were elements of racism around the vote as well. And therefore we need to say against racism, but also against austerity. Against the scapegoating of migrants, but also against the attacks on the NHS. Against Islamophobia, but also against the fact that there is not a future for your kids and there isn't a proper house for you to live in and there isn't a sense that you are listened to inside society. And doing those two together is why that demonstration is about anti-racism, anti-austerity together. We all have to build it massively. We have to put thousands of people on the streets. Thousands of people go away from here and to make sure that that demonstration is a success. The demonstration in Birmingham at the Tory party conference, if there is a Tory party conference, perhaps it won't exist in the same form by then. But anyway, it's a great opportunity again to take that message of anti-racism and anti-austerity to Birmingham on the 2nd of October. And the Stand Up to Racism conference on the 8th of October is part of ensuring that Stand Up to Racism becomes a mass movement in British society. Brilliant work has been done. The convoys to Calais, for example, absolutely crucial work that people have done. People sometimes say, oh, it's just charity. It's not just charity. Direct aid to people in the most parlous circumstances is an incredibly important act of solidarity with vulnerable people, people that we are showing that we are on their side against the horrendous treatment from the French government, the British government and the European Union. We're on your side. We regard you as sisters and brothers. Taking that direct aid over there is incredibly important. We want to build on it as well, though. We want, broader than that, to build the sense of anti-racism in Britain and to tear the head off the government that is implementing that racism, and to say the real solution in Calais is to let all those people into Britain now. We want the kids, we want those children to be in school for September. We want that to be possible. And I see that the French government is saying, oh, now that you've voted for Brexit, we're not going to stop people who want to come to Britain from Calais. Bloody wonderful, if that's one of the results. If that's one of the results of the vote, that's even better. We have to make Stand Up to Racism a real thing in workplaces, in communities, badges at work. I support refugees and migrants. All of these sorts of things are very, very important. So there's a programme of actions. There'll be many other things as well, but there's central ones that we want to build around. But I want to finish on the question of the Labour Party, because I know there's lots of people in Britain, I don't really have to know, 60,000 have joined the party. There's lots of people who think the central question now is to join the Labour Party. And there's probably people in this room who are thinking, I quite like what that lot say, but actually I'm going to join the Labour Party. And they might not even say it, because it's quite difficult sometimes. But, you know, it's a very real feeling at the moment. So I want to just spend the last 3 minutes talking about that. The first reason why I don't think that's the right thing to do is because, as I said before, what the Labour leadership crisis is demonstrating is that the crucial struggles take place outside Parliament. Even, you know, Labour Party people have to talk about this now. Corbyn cannot survive through the votes of the MPs. It's impossible. That's not where the struggle is. And there's a more general question that all of the key decisions in society are not taken in Parliament. They're taken by the people who own and control the means of production in society, the offices, the factories, the land and so on. These are the people who make the real decisions whether Parliament decides one way or not. The second thing is the experience of Syriza in Greece. It was a year ago that at the opening rally, we all held up the sign saying, Ochi, no to austerity. And it was tremendous. The Greek people were rising in support of the Syriza government against the plans of the European Union. Within days, the Syriza government had done a deal to implement austerity more ruthless than that which had been proposed by their Tory predecessors. And now they are fighting in the streets, the riot police, using tear gas against people who are protesting over their pensions being taken away, and Syriza is herding refugees into detention camps. That is a terrible tragedy in less than a year. But it's not because Alexis Tsipras was an evil person. It's because that's not how you can really change society. You have to change society by mass movements, by the power of the working class, by building a movement at the base of society, not at the top of society. And the same issues that faced Syriza and Tsipras and faced Hollande in France will also face Jeremy Corbyn when it comes. And that's not to denigrate Corbyn or the left of the Labour Party, that's the reality. The third thing I want to talk about is the pressure to compromise, which is massive, massive. There's a pressure to compromise on Corbyn right from the start. That's why he came out for a Remain vote, which was a tragedy, by the way. It would have transformed the whole campaign if Corbyn had been for a Leave vote. That's why he is probably going to give in to Len McCluskey and Tim Roach of the GMB and say that there'll be a free vote on Trident, which will enable the Labour Party to have a position in support of Trident at the next election. And there's also a pressure on to give in over the freedom of movement. During the referendum campaign, it wasn't just UKIP and the Tories who came out against the freedom of movement of workers into Britain. It was also substantial sections of the Labour Party. Ed Balls, Tom Watson, but also the left. Len McCluskey raised this question towards the end of the campaign. And regrettably, John McDonnell raised this issue as well. The pressure to compromise is massive. Let's be clear, we are not going to compromise around that question. Every worker is welcome to come to Britain. Every child is welcome to come to Britain. We are for, yes, we are for an end to Fortress Europe. We're for an end to Fortress Britain as well. We're for the abolition of immigration controls. Our sisters and brothers are the working class people across the whole of the globe. And we welcome them here because immigration has been massively positive for Britain and the British working class movement. And for all of those reasons, the crucial question is not to join the Labour Party. It is to unite in struggle against racism and austerity, but it's also to say, at this time of crisis, and crisis is not going to go away, crisis is the new normal in politics at the moment. At this time of crisis, we need a stronger socialist presence, a stronger group of people who recognise the need to put socialist politics into all the battles that are taking place at the moment, and that means an independent socialist alternative to the Labour Party.
Okay, I think there's a saying, isn't it, that you reap what you sow. And I think the ruling class for decades reaped destruction on large parts of this country. The destruction of Thatcherism, the destruction after the defeat of the miners and so on and so forth. I saw a very, very good quote from somebody in a very deprived area, I think it was South Wales, who said, "We got austerity for 30 years. It didn't start when the crash happened." And I think that very well sums up what happened to those people. It's also worth remembering that those places, in the main, were the heartlands of British social democracy, and often of a sort of left social democracy and so on and so forth. And I think when you look at the destruction, that underpins why there was such a kickback, anti-establishment feeling, and it also underpins that element of the racism. The both are fed, in a way, both to the hatred of the elite, but also for a whole question on the question of immigration. And I think unless we start to address as a left, and I don't just mean the SWP, I mean more generally left in the workers' movement, the social conditions underpinning that, then actually then we are missing the trick. We can't just say racism is bad. It is bad. We have to tackle the social questions which drive people into the question of immigration. And let's be clear, if you are living in desperate situations, the notion that actually immigration should be curbed isn't seen to be way out there. You were told by Gordon Brown that it should be British jobs for British workers, day in, day out, not just from the right-wing media, but from social democracy in those organisations. This line was peddled in greater or lesser form. So they're not out there some wild, swivel-eyed right-wing racists who will actually be pulled by that argument. It seems to me also that therefore we have to think about how that general slogan of no to austerity, no to racism, brilliant, that's the overarching, if you like, slogan. How does that again get put concretely to actually start to address the very, very, very issues? I think the question of housing, for example, is absolutely central if we're going to undercut the right and undercut some of the arguments. If you look at the vote, I'm from Bristol, it's very interesting. It was a city that voted 60% to remain. The areas which voted to leave are the most deprived. Also, those areas, by and large, saw a very big vote in the Bristol mayor election, a black candidate who won. So it's not straightforward at all. Now, I think in Bristol, what I'm talking about the wider movement, is to say to the mayor, brilliant, you got elected. Come together. He saw off the convoy to Calais. Brilliant. Now, you don't want to set an illegal budget. We all accept the budget coming to Bristol is going to be devastating. Massive cut. You don't want to set a legal budget. We think you should. What we've got today is, okay, that's a score draw, and we all go home. We have to say to the mayor, okay, but at least call a demonstration in this city against the government, against austerity, against racism, against the question of housing in Bristol, and in that way start to undercut some of the reactionary elements. Because if he doesn't, and if we don't have a movement, then we are into difficult times. So I think we've got to think concretely how we oppose the question of the social conditions underlying.
Our next speaker will be Kate Mayer from Leeds, and Kate will be followed by Anne Lemon. I am going to have to be very strict on the timings, comrades. We have had so many speaker slips in already, and we want this to be as full a discussion as possible.
Sorry, comrades. I think it's absolutely right that our job as socialists is to shape the movement. I had quite an interesting discussion with two members of the Labour Party earlier on, and they were very, very different, actually, because they're both very, very, very pissed off with it. With the stuff in all the press around the Labour Party, you would be forgiven for thinking that it was nothing to do with the Tories being in crisis, wouldn't you? Because actually, what we should be doing at this moment across the country is leaping in the streets and cheering the fact that that bastard Cameron's gone and that the rest of them are massively in disarray. Now, they chose that moment, those 172 MPs, to absolutely undercut that, to divert attention and to use every single state mechanism at their disposal to have a go at Jeremy Corbyn. You know, Jeremy Corbyn, is anti-Semitic. That doesn't quite work so well, does it, for people who are promoting racism themselves? Jeremy Corbyn, I don't know, I think the latest thing was he was actually very, very aggressive. Quite a difficult one to come up with. But, you know, I think there's a lot of very, very pissed off people. But I do think, you know, I saw people arguing to join the Labour Party yesterday, and I thought the problem with that is hundreds of thousands of people already did join the Labour Party, and Jeremy Corbyn is still under attack. So what we do have to say, and I agree with Charlie, is absolutely where does the power lie, not only to defend Corbyn, but to change things, actually. Because when you look at 10,000 people standing outside the Houses of Parliament saying, keep Corbyn, that has a tremendous impact. That is, you know, it's great, isn't it? 60,000 people joining the Labour Party this week. But if they sit at home and just think that's enough, I don't think it is. So I think our role is to shape a movement, to build for the strikes, to build for the demonstration, and actually to say we have a vision of something where there is no austerity, where there is no starvation, and refugees are welcome here.
Our next speaker is Anne Lemon. Anne will be followed by Jim Nichol.
One of the things that Charlie said was that there haven't been that many strikes, but the strikes that have taken place have been vitally important. And there's never more so than the NUT strike that's going to take place on Tuesday. Because if it hadn't been for the doctors' dispute, I don't actually believe that Kevin Courtney would have pushed forward with as much vigour and as much confidence for us to be able to have this action on Tuesday. We had the ballot, and we only had a 25% turnout, but of that 25%, we had a 92% yes vote. So there have been in schools debates and discussions about the level of the turnout. And I just want to share one little anecdote with you. School in my area, 55 NUT members, fantastic school. Every single strike, they've been out solidly and they've closed the school every time. I'm the executive member, so I had an email from the rep saying they were very concerned about the low turnout. They really understood the issues, but they just didn't want the strike to happen now. And could I send their message, very long, detailed report to Kevin Courtney in order to explain why they wanted the strike to be called off. I spent quite a long time responding to that and went through all the arguments, because the arguments are really clear. It's not that teachers don't want to take action. Every school we've been into, when we put the case, people vote yes for the action. It's the fact they just didn't get the ballot papers back. And that's probably a scenario about the fact there's a lot of people in schools where they haven't got reps. It's probably a scenario of the fact that teachers are so snowed under with paperwork and they thought the strike was going to take place anyway. So the next day I got an email back from the rep. They had had a big meeting. 50 of the members had turned up to the meeting. They'd read out my response. They'd had a big discussion. And they now were going to come out in solidarity in support of that action. Now, I think the lesson of that is that where we put the argument will be won, because people are angry. People want to fight back, but they need socialists. And that's our role here, is to be able to put that argument forward and to galvanise that kind of anger. Now, this strike that's taking place on Tuesday, one of the key demands is about putting back the funding into schools that has been stolen by this government. Now, that is demand which doesn't just affect teachers, it affects all the children in the school who are going to be in big class sizes, who are going to have their learning support teacher removed, who are going to have parts of the curriculum cut. It affects parents directly as well. So this is an anti-austerity campaign that we're involved in, and on Tuesday we need to get as many people out on the streets as possible and make it as big and loud and angry as we possibly can.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jim Nichol, who will be followed by Andy Brammer from Wakefield.
I am one of the few, or some of the SWP members who voted to remain because I felt it was a shift to the right. I still believe it's a shift to the right, and I haven't changed my view. I had decided prior to Marxism that I was not going to speak at any of these meetings, because what is important is what we do in the future, and I entirely agree with Charlie. What matters is unity to fight all of the things that Charlie talked about. And And during the bruising campaign, and it was bruising, I had some severe arguments with people. I'm happy to tell you that people like myself didn't abstain from other activity. Personally, and I don't say this to boost myself, I've been to Calais 11 times. I worked in the winter in Lesbos and pulled people out of the sea. We didn't abstain, we worked, and we worked because that's what we believed in. But on the issue of whether it's a shift to the right, I still believe that. So why, having decided not to speak, have I come here now to say, no, I haven't actually come to be contentious. It was something that Charlie said yesterday. He relied very, very heavily on the Ashcroft report and the Ashcroft poll, and he told you lots and lots of statistics. And I felt, Charlie, you're underplaying the issue of immigration. So being the lawyer that I am, I went home last night, I looked up the Ashcroft report, and damn it, Charlie was right. But being the lawyer that I am, I always say to the jury, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you should have the full information before you take your decision and your verdict. And so there are lots of other things in the Ashcroft report that Charlie relies upon that were not said. I'm not saying he deliberately didn't say them, so I'm going to read just some of them to you. And Chair, you might just have to give me a little bit of indulgence. So the same people, the same people who were asked about the immigration that Charlie relied upon were also asked the following questions. And then they put the answers. How did the people who thought the following were a force for ill, how did the people who thought the following were a force for ill vote? Right? Multiculturalism, on that issue, 81% voted leave. Social liberalism, 80% of people who thought that that was ill voted leave. Feminism. Everyone who thought that was ill, 78% voted leave. The Green Movement. You thought it was ill?
Sorry, Jim, you're going to have to speed this up a little.
69%. Okay. Immigration. If you thought that was ill, if that was the question you came to, 80% voted for that. Sorry, you just have to give me just a second.
You're going to have to sum up,
No?
Jim.
Okay. Compared with Remain on the immigration, 79%, and on multiculturalism, 71% thought it was a good thing.
Finish your point now, please, Jim.
Finish.
Thank you. Andy will be followed by Stuart Brown.
You know, it's a real bugger being a Marxist sometimes, isn't it? Because you kind of look at the situation and you see what's coming, and you look at the material reality of the situation and how you analyse it and how you should respond to it, and you go, oh bugger, I'm going to fall out with some people here. And that's really how it felt around Europe. I remember having this discussion about a year ago, saying, you know, we're going to have to try and shape this like they did in Scotland. Unlikely that it's going to happen, but I'm sure the people around us aren't going to fall out with us forever. They're not going to forget the fact that the SWP has been central to the fight against fascism or the fight over refugees. People around us might think we're a little bit crackers, and some did last Friday. We had them arguments, I had them arguments, but there's nobody said to me, I'm never speaking to you again, right? And there's certainly none of them said to me, I'm not working with you again. You see, if you look at the EU as a capitalist institution whose job is to impose austerity, you've got to oppose it. Because not to oppose it would be opportunistic. And we are not opportunists. So we have to say it as we are. So we were right to do what we did. But it's also right to say that, you know, the people that voted to remain are not all in favour of austerity, right? And they're not people, I mean, there might have been, there's a saying in Yorkshire, you can't polish a turd, but you can roll it in glitter, right? And that is the nature for me. That's what some people fell for. Don't mean we have to fall out with them, though. Because, you see, if all the people that voted leave were racists, and all that voted remain are going to fall out with us forever, the SWP is pretty much finished, really, isn't it? But I don't believe either of those. Wakefield, where I'm from, 66% of people voted to leave. Who were them people? And I can prove this is true, right, because I texted it to Sadie Robinson that day. My mate Ubi, local community centre, did a little poll that day. He phoned me, he was a Remainer, by the way. He phoned me up to say, 91% of folk are voting to leave, Andy. I went, yeah, all right, Ubi. I spoke to 150 people, and he had spoken to 150 people. And I said, who are these people? He said, they're Asians, they're older people, and they're hospital workers. And he genuinely meant that. Now, I haven't got time now to go into complications of it, but you see the folk in the Remain, the people talking about joining Labour or wanting to join Labour, you see why they'll keep talking to us, right? Because they need us. And they know they need us, because we make sense when it doesn't make sense around you. And we pose the questions concretely. We will be ones fighting for the anti-racist demonstration. They will want to be there with us. And we should also listen to Corbyn. This was a vote against austerity. And we're the ones that can give the biggest voice to the fight against austerity.
Stuart Brown will be followed by Jonathan Fanning.
Hello, I think I might be one of those turds rolled in glitter, so apologies for that. Because I have the twin, perhaps, reason for being an outcast here, which is I voted Remain, and I'm currently a member of the Labour Party. So all I would say from the point of view that why I did it, because I know that there was a very strong voice from the SWP to vote to leave. I've got personal friends, members of the SWP. I've been a member of the SWP. And I still voted to remain. I kind of came around to the arguments by Yanis Varoufakis, who was obviously thrown out of the Syriza government. And so I went down that. And I'm originally from Liverpool, where there was a lot more radicalism. I've been living in Shropshire, working in Worcestershire for the past couple of years. And to say that they're blue states is an understatement, really. where I am. And I've also just been made redundant as an FE lecturer, and I've been combating racism and prejudice and all those kinds of things in my classrooms, in my staff rooms and all these kinds of things. Currently, thank you. I rejoined Labour to vote for Corbyn. I voted for Corbyn very proudly. I didn't give any second, third or fourth preference votes away to any of those leaden, grey, horrible, corporatised people who were also on the list, and I'll be doing the same again if Corbyn still stands. I just wanted to say that I think there are plenty who are like me when I talk to people in Momentum, and I'm never here to fight against you, I'm here to fight with you. Thank you. When I went to the rally to support Corbyn, was it Monday just gone? Feels like a week ago. The biggest banners and the majority of banners were from the Socialist Workers Party. You're the first out on the street, you're the first to support socialism, you're the first to take people to the fight. And I understand that. I've been on this tactic of trying to fight within, and maybe if this goes on YouTube, maybe I'll be out of the party in a week, who knows.
Could you sum up, please, comrade?
But all I'm saying is, I'm fighting for socialism, I know you're fighting for socialism, and we'll fight for what we believe in together. Thank you.
Jonathan Fanning will be followed by Maxine Bowler.
Hi, yeah, I'm also a member of the Labour Party, East Riding of Yorkshire. In my part of Yorkshire, we're a bit nervous about calling comrades turds, but that's the slightly different way from Wakefield. I voted Remain, and I voted Remain for actually for a very simple reason, because when I went into the ballot box on the day, and I still hadn't made up my mind, I thought, Jeremy Corbyn, I joined the Labour Party to support Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn has called for a Remain vote. Even though I don't actually think Jeremy Corbyn is a natural Remainer, just like I'm not a natural Remainer, I owed my leader support, I owed my leader loyalty, and I voted for him. And that's what I did. And that's because I joined the Labour Party, and I actually thought I joined something, I should commit to it. People remember me from being, when I used to be a member of the SDP, might argue about whether my level of commitment and support of leadership was. But actually on this occasion I thought, no, that's what I joined for, and that's what I'd done. I'm also quite aware of the fact that I haven't attended many Labour Party meetings, because to be honest, Frank, God, they're not very interesting. One thing about the SWP is you have interesting meetings, I'll give you that. But now I realise actually that was a big mistake. But partly it's because actually it's not really well set up for people. They only meet every couple of months. And I think we've actually got a pretty decent constituent or local branch from when I have attended them. Quite young, quite a few people coming in. So I think if you are a member of the Labour Party, I think if we are going to remove some of these traitors, people who have less loyalty to the leader than I have, and then I think we actually need to start attending these meetings and putting the constituency work, which I know is not particularly exciting compared to going in the street, but is still actually going to be important. However, it seems to be bottled. I'll actually better ask the question I put down in my slip that I said I was going to ask. The reality is, in York, I actually felt, I know the dramatic thing you do, I've defriended a lot of the Remain campaigners. No, not the Brexit campaigners, the Remain campaigners, even though I voted with them. I defriended them on Facebook because of the absolute abuse they were heaping on the working class. Let's be clear about it. Some of the Remain campaigners, and I don't know about who was going to the left, who was going to the right, some of the Remain campaigners hated the working class. Many of them were liberal, lifestyle, politics, absolutely dreadful thing. And the second point I'd make, however, is I'm from Bradford originally, and in Bradford, my parents voted leave for very racist reasons because they wanted the Muslims out. So too many Muslims in Bradford were voting leave. Absolutely dreadful. Muslim friends voted leave because they wanted more Muslims in. And they felt actually that, and they were racist as well because they felt Eastern Europeans would be pushed out and that more people from Pakistan would come in. That was the kind of lies and disputes that were being put out there. So I think, I really agree, we have to work together, but we have a problem. Some of the people in York calling anti-racism demonstrations are specifically saying this is anti-Brexit. Stay in Europe, fight racism. And they're making the point, if you don't agree to overthrow the referendum, you are still supporting racism. How do we relate to people like that?
Yes, please, comrade. Thank you. Maxine Bowler will be followed by Petros Constantinou.
I want to say that we were absolutely right to take the position that we did. And if Corbyn had stuck to his original position, we would have had a massive campaign, a massive anti-austerity, anti-racist campaign. And working class people would not have seen Tories and Labour cuddling up to each other on the platform, something that I think many working class people are absolutely appalled by. And I want to say that one of our young comrades who lives upon one of the big council estates, she got nearly everybody on her street to come and vote. Most of those people had never voted before. They came to vote against austerity. They came to put a boot in on the establishment. And I think that that's why we were absolutely right to stand with those people. But what we do now matters. On Tuesday, the Sheffield Trades Union Council, which is headed by Martin Mayer, who is on on the national executive of Unite, we're split 50-50, Lexit and Remain. But we voted unanimously to defend Corbyn, to put a statement in the local press that we will pay for, with loads of trade unionists saying that Corbyn has to stay. And so what we do is going to make a big difference, I think. We agreed to support the 16th demonstration and to put transport on. Actually, young people in our area have organised a protest called Don't Let Brexit Divide Us, which will take place on the 9th. I think that's quite an important initiative, and it's something we definitely have to be standing alongside. And the stand up to racism stuff, we're having our organising meeting after the convoy to Cali. But I want to say we have to make sure we stay with the people who have been supporting the stand up to racism initiative. In Sheffield, our convoy was sent off by the Labour group in Sheffield, and actually we are influencing a whole number of those people around the question of racism, and we have to continue to do that. In the end of the day, we have to fight like mad to defend Corbyn. But the truth of the matter is that we believe that Labour will disappoint people, just as Syriza have done. And that means, for us, there's lots of people who are influenced by Corbyn at the moment and want to see him victorious as we do. We have to stay close to those people. We need to continue a dialogue with those people. We shouldn't dismiss them. We have to be alongside them. I know loads and loads of people inside the Stand Up to Racism are influenced by Corbyn. We need to be alongside them, defending Corbyn, but at the end of the day, providing a socialist alternative to make sure we don't have the same kind of rotten defeat that Syriza created.
After Petros, our final speaker will be Suzanne Jeffrey.
Dear comrades, I'm from SEC, from Greece, and also member of Antarsia. We are very happy about the results in the referendum in the United Kingdom, because this 52% for us is the continuation of the OHI, of the 62% that the Greek people voted last year. And this is a huge blow against the European ruling class. They're very angry now. They didn't expect that. You know, in Greece, they didn't expect either this result. So the newspapers, in the next day, they came with the result that they had in their minds, very stupidly, saying that the Remain vote won. And it was, and this was also on the newspaper of Syriza party. So, and also Alexis Tsipras came here to support the Remain campaign, and he got very good congratulations from who? David Cameron. So there are big changes, but what is really crucial in the Greek experience is that the people from below with their strikes, they opened the way for a left turn in Greece. So Syriza was leading this left turn. They pointed to the parliamentary way to change things from above, from a left government. But when the ruling class came after him, came after Alexis Tsipras, he retreated. He made the choice to go to a compromise with the ruling classes and not to go to the workers. The workers in Greece, with 62%, they say no to the agreement, no to the European Union, and they are showing a different way. So what is happening today is not disappointment. What happened really, because there is left outside Syriza, and it is strong, there is the anti-capitalist left, is the Communist Party, is the Popular Unity Party that split it from Syriza. There is a big left that it is showing a different way. We had already 4 general strikes in Greece during the Syriza period. We have 1 month strike that in the last month against the privatization of port. And when Tsipras was applauding the deal between European Union and Turkey, arguing that this is the best agreement, this is a European solution, the majority of the population in Greece, they opened the borders. They gave food and shelter to more than 1 million refugees, and really, they show how we can fight racism. And today we continue. We have to continue the struggle in order to close the door for the fascists and for the right wing. We are optimistic that we can do it, and the results of Brexit and the strikes in France and all around Europe, this is the power to change things from below. Parliament is not working. The power should rely to the workers and their struggles. And this is the choice that we have to make. And our appeal to the people who are looking to the Labour Party, okay, we're very happy, and we want all the bastards who are coming after Corbyn to be defeated. But the parliamentary road is not working. We have to build the revolutionary parties. We have to build the left outside the parliamentary parties, rooted in the working class, in the streets, to open the borders and to fight the bankers. This is a way for us.
Thank you. Our last speaker will be Suzanne Jeffrey.
Charlie mentioned earlier the importance of politics, but I'd also like to add to that we've also, what we're experiencing here is a huge politicization of society. It's been absolutely phenomenal over the last week. Incredible. For me, it started the recognition of the scale of the thing. I was walking down the street, coming home with a partner after going for a drink, and this random bloke on the street just shouted after us on the eve of the referendum, "Are you in or are you out?" And I'm thinking, who are you? I don't know you. Why are you talking to me about politics? And that has continued on a much greater scale for the whole of this week. If that's the case, if there is that huge politicization taking place, these are enormous, important opportunities. And by the way, that kind of scale of politicization is never going to happen without deep social crisis. So many on the Remain camp are fearful. They're fearful about what that means when the bottom of society starts turning up and moving around, and where's it going to end up? And therefore, they try to hold on to some stability for fear of what the outcome. We have to say this instability is the absolute key to change, and we have to recognise the huge opportunities in those situations. So I just want to make a comment about the points that Jim was making earlier on, because when he went through those statistics, I was a little bit unclear on some of the things he was saying, but I think I get the gist of it. That, in other words, that those people who were voting left were fundamentally to the right on a whole number of issues. But I'd actually put it another way around. Precisely because of the ongoing neoliberalism, the 30 years people have spoken about, the community that I come from in the northeast, certainly that has gone on for the last 30 years. Those kind of ideas, however, are contested ideas, and we have to see them as contested ideas. They're not settled ideas. So I'm particularly active around the question of climate politics, etc. And Jim mentioned the environment, opposition to green politics on the Leave camp. Well, let's put it this way round. They are contested, and we have to fight that territory. So let's think about it like this. The Tories have been disunited over Europe, but they haven't been disunited around the question of fracking. They've united on the question of fracking. They've united on the question of backing the fossil fuel industry against renewable industry. They've tried to pose it to working class people as of benefit to them. Somehow you're going to get cheap energy, you're going to get jobs if you back the fossil fuel way, and they've minimised climate change whilst we've been up to our necks in water. Can you see how that's contested? Can you see there is an opportunity there for us to fight in working class communities and say, no, let's not go with the fossil fuel industry lining its pockets to destroy our planet and destroy our futures. Let's go with renewable industry, let's go with climate jobs, let's go with standing up against the system and fighting for a kind of society that prioritises the interests of ordinary people over the interests of the rich. It's contested. We've got a huge opportunity to pull it back in our direction.
Thank you. Thank you, comrades, for a very interesting discussion.
I want to start with Jim, because Jim and I had a lively correspondence during the referendum period. It's absolutely true that the figures he says are in the Ashcroft report. They're one of the most misinterpreted set of figures that have been used across Facebook. And therefore it's important that I tell you, he's quite right. Solicitors have to look at all the documents. You have to look at the tables on which they're based rather than just the infographic, though. Because people see it and it says, force for ill, multiculturalism, leave 81%. And people think that means 81% of people who voted leave think multiculturalism is a bad thing. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that. It means of people who think multiculturalism is a bad thing, 81% of them voted Leave. But when you look at the tables underlying it, it shows they make up only 14% of the Leave voters. And therefore only 14% of people thought multiculturalism is a bad thing. And therefore, Jim, it doesn't show what you were saying. It shows actually, as I said yesterday, that there were a substantial section of people who come up with anti-migrant reasons. It's not a surprise. Nearly 4 million people voted for UKIP at the general election last year. But that actually most people have an uncertain view about these questions, or actually have better views about these questions. And therefore, it reinforces this notion of contradictory consciousness in workers' heads. We're completely familiar with this. You go to a picket line, worker is brilliant about we've got to stop the factory, the boss is a bastard and so on. Oh, I don't much like the East Europeans. We're completely familiar with this, to be honest. It's a challenge of revolutionary politics always, and the challenge is for us to bring forward what Gramsci called the elements of good sense in people and push back the elements of domination by ruling class ideas. And we're going to do that principally through the mechanism of action. Arguments matter. Goodness me, why do we bother to stand up here and spout on about these things? Arguments matter, but it's action that really is the crucial question. I know I haven't got long left. Now people have to pick up their kids at the creche and so on. The thing that Suzanne said about politics is very, very important, and it links to the strikes as well. Why was the junior doctors' strike so successful? Because people thought junior doctors in general are an underpaid group in British society, and one day they'll become consultants and they're terribly bad off, aren't they? Not really. Not really. People supported them because they were absolutely right to raise the slogan, we're striking in defence of the NHS. And this is why the teachers' strike will be a success. We're striking in defence of education will be the key thing for teachers next Tuesday. And every strike, the university strikers, the FE lecturers who've been on strike, trying to go on strike, and all the groups of strikers, they will be immeasurably stronger if they can say, we're striking for something bigger. And you can do this even if you're a food worker or something. You're striking because austerity has gone too far, because our people aren't getting their proper shake in society. These are the sorts of political phrases that can connect with what the feeling is inside society. Stuart Brown, look, you're massively welcome at this event. It's really important that members of the Labour Party, people who voted Remain, come along to this event. And it's the crucial thing is we have to build together. Whether we're in the Labour Party or not, we are going to go on a journey now over the next few weeks and months which will show which is the best set of policies and strategies to take us forward. But the most important thing in the immediacy is we unite around these questions against racism, against austerity, and make sure that there is the biggest possible movement which can throw back the attempt by the racists to grow and cannot allow the Tories to regroup. It will be an absolute tragedy if they're able to get back into a position where they are able to implement austerity on us. At the moment, they cannot stand up to any serious resistance, even small resistance in truth. They can't stand up against it. They haven't got a secure majority. They're not sure who their leader is. There isn't really a government in Britain at the moment. This is the best time to fight, and the trade union leaders must wake up to this fact and start the resistance. My final point is this. I've talked about the points of unity. That's right. But if you want to be with us, building for the 16th of July, building Stand Up to Racism, at the same time building in every community, in every union, against austerity and racism and Islamophobia, if you want to fight climate change which threatens the whole of humanity and the planet, you have to be a revolutionary socialist. You have to say, we need a system that is not driven by the interests of a tiny elite at the top of society and by the rule of profit, but is dominated by the interests of the overwhelming majority of the world's population. For the 99% against the 1% means that we have to build independent revolutionary organisation. That's why you should join the SWP.